Hey everyone, welcome to the Unfiltered Podcast. Lee Stevenson here, Executive Director of Church Planning with Converge.
Danny Parmalee, I oversee church planning for Converge Mid-America.
And we are in part 2 of a series of episodes where we're just talking about managing, leading in the midst of economic downturn. And so episode 1 of this conversation was specifically talking about the art of budgeting and putting together the numbers if you know that you're facing financial hardship. And this episode, we're going to take some time to specifically talk about the art of staffing. How do you staff? How do you manage staff in the midst of economic challenging moments? And even, I think some of it is the dream of staff. Because sometimes you might be a young church plant, Danny, and you're going, man, this was the year we were going to hire that position, you know, a number 2 guy or a worship pastor, or we were going to move our worship pastor from part-time to full-time. And then all of a sudden you're sitting there going, I don't know where the money's going to be or if the money's even going to be there. How do you manage some of that? And maybe just talk, first of all, from your own personal experience with that.
Yeah, well, I would say that that while this is a difficult time, I think there's also a silver lining, and there are some opportunities here. I think that church planters right now need to understand that this gives them almost an excuse or opportunity to shuffle the deck. There will also be people that are going to be losing their secular jobs or getting their secular jobs going from full-time to part-time that have always been considering ministry. Maybe even God has made it really clear that they're called to ministry and they've been fighting it. And this is going to be the thing that says, no, you will be doing this. And so I think that there's going to be some opportunities here just as much as there are some hardships. I do think that obviously things rise and fall on leadership, and your staff are your leaders. So it also will require some hard decisions as well, too. I would also say to be careful not to respond too quickly. So if all of a sudden your giving is down, that you think the only way forward is literally to fire staff. Okay, so instead, I might suggest that that you slow down, that you take a deep breath, and that you're honest with staff without scaring them. In other words, like, hey, everybody's job is on the line and everyone's going to take pay cuts and yada, yada, yada. But that you also have some conversations just where things are at, because there may be other people where things are changing for them and changing in their own family unit. And maybe someone who is in ministry now actually needs to go back to secular work because of homes, virtual school, all sorts of different things. So to not just overreact too emotionally and make too many drastic decisions just based on emotion or on a month or 2 of bad giving.
Or Monday morning.
Or Monday morning, yeah.
Because once you get those numbers, it is easy to take it very personal and allow your emotions to get invested. So let me ask a clarifying question. You said, economic challenge could be a moment of shuffling the deck. What do you mean by that?
So the other thing I think is that you're looking at even the staff that you have now, and there may be different needs. So in other words, before, because things were so Sunday centric, there may be things that you're not utilizing a person as much for, or how much resources, human resource you put into that, but you may need something else now. So before, it would have been a luxury to have a online campus pastor, video streaming expert, whatever. I don't know, you can make up whatever titles you want, where now that's not the luxury. That's actually maybe the main position. You may need to switch someone's job and role from whatever they're doing over to that. There could have been someone who is a children's ministry director, but they just happen to have this knack for all of that other online stuff, which again, I know it's kind of a cliche example, but just if you run with me, so that now all of a sudden they shift over to that. And that's going to open up an opportunity. And maybe you're not meeting yet with kids, or you've realized that you can do kids in a different way. And so that goes from a full-time position now to a part-time position. So it's almost bringing it back to a blank slate to be able to rearrange and to figure out, here's the resources I have financially, here's the human resources, and here's the needs and the slots. If I'm starting all over, where am I going to put people for how much time, how much money, and that type of thing. So,
and I think in that process, trust the Lord's grace in the challenges as well. I know even for us, like I had one time we were facing a economic downturn. We didn't know it was quite coming, and all of a sudden I had a staff person that came forward and said, I don't think this is the right place for me to serve anymore, and
Yep.
they felt like ministry was just beyond them, and they wanted to go take a secular job, and then they exited on their own, and then it was a month later that we went into an economic downturn, and all of a sudden, I'm thankful I don't have that salary to pay. And I'm like, that
Yeah.
was really the grace of God that helped us out in that process before,
Mhm.
you know, we didn't know that the challenge was even on the horizon at that point.
Yeah. And I think in addition to that, you may have someone who leaves and they're actually really good and doing a good job. So you might think, I need to replace this position. In other words, hey, we've always had a full-time XYZ, fill in the blank, and Jim left or Cindy left. And so now we have to replace it. No, just again, pause and go, before you move forward, do we need that position? And if so, at how much, or do we need something else? So that's where, again, just generally speaking, to kind of think from a clean slate. So
Did you ever get to a point in your ministry and leadership, Danny, where you had to cut salaries across the board? So maybe you're facing a major economic challenge and going, for instance, well, everybody on the staff is a 20% cut.
mhm.
Did you ever face that kind of situation? Yes
um,
or no? And I'll let you kind of explain
yeah,
how you can handle
yeah, we never did, thankfully. And part of that in this, listen to or not episode one, but part one of this series of just kind of the budgeting. We were fairly conservative in how we did it, and whenever we built it, we almost did build staff as like um, almost like the locked in. We wanted to make sure that we weren't hiring staff or giving raises unless we knew that we could do that, and everything else, there was other things that we could kind of take off. So thankfully, we were never in a situation where we had to cut staff. I never had to take a pay cut. Now, I would say that we weren't paying oodles and oodles of money. I would say we were pretty middle of the road, if not middle of the road, even lower on what we paid our staff. And we didn't offer benefits even. And when I left, we had 22 staff. We didn't have insurance or 401k or anything like that. We kept it a little bit simpler, where it was like, here is the cash and we're expecting you can get your own insurance and your own benefits packages that way.
Would you have
So
always maintained that, or did you have hopes of changing that at some point?
the insurance part of it,
Mhm.
you're saying? Um, we wrestled with it a lot. Obviously, in the beginning, it was my choice because I was leading it and in charge of human resources. And then, obviously, as we grew, and there was, an executive pastor, and then, even the board that played more of a role. And for us, and where we were, age of church, it worked out well. And especially, I mean, insurance was that was the kicker. That was the hard one to kind of figure out how you get insurance. And we were finding that people were able to do better on their own, because some people were choosing insurance, other people were choosing like the Christian share, like my wife and
Sure.
I, we used Samaritan's Ministries. And so for the church, it was easier for them to just pay us an outright salary. And then for us, our insurance costs were only, $450 a month, that we were paying, in comparison to, and a full insurance policy probably would have been between, I think it was like $13 and $1,600 a month. And now you multiply that towards lots of people, and it's just
Adds
the way
up
that we did it.
significantly. Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I know of pastors that have hit economic challenge where they've had to make a pretty drastic decision that affected all the staff. So, for
Yeah.
instance, a 10% cut or 20%
Yeah.
cut of salaries. Do you think that's a great way to move forward? Or I can see bonuses and negatives on both sides. So I'm
Yeah.
curious, like, where your own
Yeah.
personal view is of that kind of strategy.
Yeah, so I remember serving at a church where they were headed into some economic issues. I don't know if it was how much was external and how much was that's just where the church was at. And the lead pastor led by saying, I will be taking the biggest cut, and I will be the first to be cut. Now, for me, I have always had admiration for that, because I think that is true leadership. And I don't know what happened if that did. They were all preparing for that. That was communicated to the rest of the staff. If that ever happened, if his pay ever did get cut, but I don't know. I just think that if you are going to cut any salaries, that, and this is just my own personal perspective, that you as the leader, this is where you lead in that, and you say, I will, I'm gonna take the most, and then being cut across the board definitely seems the most fair, and definitely the easiest. Then you just say, hey, everybody's 5% lower, and if we can make it up by the end of the year, we'll make it back up into you. At the same time, again, maybe this is a time where you have to have that gut level check to go, you know what, if there's this one person on the team, if we just cut them completely, because we probably should anyways, that's what we need to do, and that's what's best for the church. I don't know, part of me leans a little bit more towards saying, doing that evaluation and potentially going that route. What about you?
I've never had to cut staff. I'm thankful for that. I have had a year or two here or there where it's like we couldn't do a raise, or we couldn't do any cost of living type of increase. And I think it's just sitting down and telling the staff, hey guys, this is across the board. This is just where we're at. And we've got to be extra conservative, because I don't want to cut your salary necessarily. And so in order for us to do this, I wrestle on both sides of that argument too, of if the head pastor goes down, the rest of the church is going to go down. And so making sure that the lead pastor is taken care of needs to be a precedent. But at the same time, the lead pastor is the one that needs to lead, and and show the staff and the rest of the church, this is what I'm willing to do. This is a sacrifice I'm willing to do in order for us to be able to move forward and keep the mission alive. I also want to be sensitive to those that are out there listening that are solo pastors, solo church planters, because sometimes you hit a season, like I was talking with a planter recently. They're a solo pastor, don't have any other really paid staff, maybe a few contracted staff that are non-negotiables for them to be able to just to operate, like an accountant. You gotta have somebody. What do they do when all of a sudden they realize, I don't know if we're going to have a month from now, be able to afford to pay me. That's another predicament when it comes to the staffing side that sometimes gets missed in this conversation. What would be your counsel to a solo church planter, Danny, if they realize, man, a month from now, I don't know if we're going to have enough money to pay me?
So first of all, this is a total cop out, but I'm going to say, did you raise your full financial support before you started this thing? Because do you remember me telling you the importance of that? But seriously, joking aside, it is another one of those reasons why having that outside support for that 3 to 4 year period when there is, just complete instability. Now, let's say you're solo planter, you raised your support, but that's ran out, and internally it's started to go down. Man, it's so hard to speak to that because there are just so many. Each scenario is different. Like, are you at a place where it makes sense that even if you take no pay for a while, that's actually what's going to help the church, and eventually you'll get back up and maybe even get back pay at that point? Is also different than, what, if I take a pay cut now, this whole church is done, because it means I have to go get a job somewhere else, and we've been on a decline, which then again might go to some of the things that we've talked about, where it's like, hey, if you're already kind of on a decline and you're unhealthy, COVID might be, the straw that breaks the camel's back type of thing. And that just might be the way that it works out. So I think it's really hard because each situation is so different. And there's that balance of leadership, self-sacrifice, but you also still need to provide for your family. So are there other things that can go? And maybe it is. Maybe you literally go, you know what, we've been renting this super nice theater, whatever, we don't have a lease, and we can say, no, we're not going to meet there. We're going to meet here or something else, so that, we can make up some of that money. So I don't know.
No,
Feel free to disagree with me or whatever. That's a hard one. So thanks for asking me that one first.
yeah, well, I like to take you by surprise every now and then. I do think some of the challenge, like I've seen it happen in 2020, where you have a pastor that's maybe 2 or 3 years in, and they were told and coached, hey, raise 2, 3, 4 years of income, but with the idea that it'd probably be dropping off
Mhm.
because the church still be growing
Yep.
into that. And then all of a sudden COVID hit and they can't meet and the church didn't grow into it. And they've lowered their threshold of what they need from outside funding to come in. And now they're put in a weird position, realizing, oh no, what I was predicting isn't there. And they can put themselves in a challenging spot. I think you really come down to you have only a few options. One is you got to hit the fundraising trail really hard
Yep.
again. And the challenge with that is sometimes there's a gap between the ask and when money actually comes in the door. And so you've got to figure out, can we bridge that moment of history of maybe having a down level, less money to be able to come in. The second is you get a part-time job.
Mhm.
That's just reality. And the third is you're going to have to look at either some type of merger or other type of situation where you get adopted as a mission project by another substantially healthy economic situation with another church or something.
Yeah. And kind of related to that, and this goes back to a little bit what I was saying in the beginning, is that because culture has just shifted so much in 2020 of just expectation of anything, going to the grocery store, going to the airport, what is church, when is church, is that there are more opportunities now to do it different. So maybe it isn't, you could be a full-time pastor, but you are, driving Uber, and you're also sharing the preaching with someone else and the responsibility, and they're also doing that. Whereas before, it was so hard to pull off something like that. The expectations are different. So again, not as having it just be the trite answer, but COVID has allowed the church to innovate. And so maybe God is doing something to force some sort of innovation in the way that you're accomplishing church. How are you accomplishing evangelism and discipleship? It might look different. Your time might be sliced up different. Your income streams might be sliced up a little bit different. But if you're still reaching people for Christ, raising them up to be fully devoted followers of Christ, you're still a full-time pastor. So figure out how to kind of make it up. And not saying you shouldn't, there are going to be times where God is using it to kind of call you to stop. I hate to use the word quit, but to stop. But maybe just don't prematurely throw in the towel and say, well,
Yes.
money's gone. I need to get a full-time job. I can't do anything anymore.
And I think people have to be reminded, embrace the challenge because it's in the challenge that opportunity is presented. And so look for the new opportunities, ways to do things different. And I think the other thing I would encourage as we kind of wrap up the second level of this economic downturn leading in the midst of it from a financial standpoint, don't be afraid of having the conversation.
Yes.
Your people need to know. Your church needs to understand. Your leaders need to know before it hits crisis level. And you want to cast the vision and help reimagine the mission without using guilt and fear as the driver to why people should give. Don't shame them into it, but cast clear vision and compelling, like, this is why we're doing what we're doing. Would you be able to step up and help us with that?
Yeah, that's great. And again, I keep having different ideas that are kind of popping in, but again, maybe this is the time where we go to unthinkable areas such as even sharing staff. So it's like, oh man, like the other person that can't afford a full-time worship person that meets Sunday mornings, and you can't afford a full-time worship person and you're meeting Sunday nights, maybe for the kingdom of God, something's orchestrated there, no pun intended, that the worship person is shared or whatever. Or maybe it's even you as the pastor, and you're like you said, you had mentioned a few different things that I think is great. Like, hey, maybe there is some sort of merging together. Maybe there's some sort of sharing. It's sharing space, sharing staff, meeting at different times, all sorts of different things. So again, especially if there's planters that are listening to this that feel hopeless because in their minds, it just has to be either one way or the other. That I just want to encourage, just start to think and to dream what could be the possibility, your own staffing, other staff members, and have much more of a kingdom perspective than this is how we've always seen church done.
Absolutely. Think out of the box for sure. Well, great conversation. I want to thank everybody for tuning in to the Unfiltered podcast. And until next time, keep it real.